Hello everybody, today I'm going to make a set of 5 Gatefold A.t.cs. I'm starting here by making a collage background. I'm using some old painted papers that I've torn up and I'm adhering them down using some P.V.A glue mixed with water. Once I've finished creating the background, I will cut it up and I will use it to form the base of the 5 A.t.cs. These painted paper scraps were created about 3 years ago when I first started art journaling. I didn't have many supplies and I decided to make some of my own. So I mixed black acrylic paint with water in a spray bottle and I used it through various different stencils which I made myself. I watched a video by Jenny Belly. The video was called Make Your Own Stencils from Rubbish, which is what I did. I'm going to put the link to her video in the description below this one if you'd like to go and check that out. I can't remember where I was inspired to mix acrylic paint with water to create a spray, but personally I wouldn't recommend doing that, seeing as the nozzle got clogged up quite a lot. I'm now applying some acrylic paint. I'm using a paint spreader here, but you can also use a credit card to apply the paint. A full list of products used in this video can be found in the description below. I'm not thinking much here, I'm just playing and having fun, adding some paint where I think it looks good. Being spontaneous and free when you create, and having fun and playing, I feel often creates the most unique and interesting backgrounds. Here I'm applying acrylic paint to some bubble wrap, which I'm using to print with, and it creates some interesting patterns. These painted papers were created using my jelly plate. There are many different YouTube videos about jelly printing that you can watch. I would recommend you check out the Jelly Arts channel. They have a whole host of interesting videos about different techniques to try with the jelly plate. I will also put a link to that channel in the description below. I now dry the background fully before I move on to the next step because I don't want the warm colours, the red and the yellow paint, to mix with the green and blue colours that I'm going to add. This is a piece of non-slip draw liner which I'm using to stencil through and also to print with. I'm now going to use some punchinella or sequin waste to also stencil through and print with. Here I'm using a bottle lid to add some circles to the background. I like using found objects or things I can recycle and use in my artwork, like this bubble wrap which I'm using to add some texture. I decided I wanted to add some metallic paint to the page. I've mixed the paint with some water and I'm using a fan brush which I'm loading with paint and then tapping it to create splatters across the background. I love adding paint splatters to my art journal pages or to most art projects I create. I love the random and interesting patterns it creates. I especially love adding black paint splatters. That's one of my favourite things to do. I'm scoring this white card to create the gatefold element for my A.t.cs. I repeat this process twice on 2 separate pieces of card to create enough covers for all 5 A.t.cs. The gatefold is basically to create doors at the front of the A.t.cs which will open to reveal your decorated A.t.c inside. I'm now using Mod Podge to adhere some torn book pages onto the white card. I'm going to create a background, and once this is dried fully, I will then use a technique to create a faux crackle effect on top. To create the faux crackle effect, first of all you take your white school glue or P.V.A glue, whatever you have, and you apply it to your background. I'm applying my glue in different directions because I want the crackles to appear to be both vertical and horizontal. Whichever way you apply your glue is the way your crackles will look at the end. I'm now going over the wet glue with black acrylic paint. You of course can use any colour acrylic paint that you like to create whichever colour scheme or look that you require. I paint over the wet glue on both the backgrounds. Once this starts to dry, the crackles will start to form. You will see them slowly appearing through the black paint. After allowing the paint to dry by itself for a little while, I decided to speed up the process by using my heat gun. As you can see, the crackles start to form as the heat is applied and you get this amazing effect. Instead of using book paper underneath, you could also use scrapbook paper or just a different colour of paint, whatever you want to see through your crackles. I really love how these turned out. They ended up looking and feeling a lot like leather. I then cut them down to size so they would fit around the 5 A.t.cs. Artist trading cards are what we call A.t.cs, and they are usually 2.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches in length. I cut down the background, which I created at the beginning of the video, into postcard sized pieces in case I want to use any of it for future projects, index cards, things like that. Here I'm cutting it down further to form the 5 A.t.cs that I'm going to use for this project. I really love how the backgrounds turned out, and as you can see they fit nicely into the gatefold covers that I created earlier. I'm now going to begin making my first A.t.c. I tore one of the background pieces in half and I've got the inside of a security envelope which I'm going to stick these pieces to create a slit down the middle. I will be repeating this process for all 5 of my A.t.cs. I want them to have a reoccurring theme and this will help them form part of a set. They will all have a split and behind the split will be envelope paper. I'm now using a pokey tool to create some holes. I decided that I wanted to do some stitching across the split. This is another process that I will repeat across all 5 A.t.cs to form a coherent set. I'm using black embroidery thread to stitch across the middle of the split in the A.t.c. Before I started this project, I had no set ideas of what I was going to create. I just sat down with my art supplies and decided to make a background and see where it went from there. Luckily it turned out okay in the end and I'm happy with what I created. The only thing I knew for certain was at the beginning I wanted to make a set of 5 gatefold A.t.cs. I'm using this heart-shaped stamp which I bought from Hobbycraft in the UK, and I'm using some black Archival ink and I'm stamping the heart onto some white card. I then cut the heart out and I then decided I would like to stitch through the heart when I add it onto the A.t.c. Before adding the heart to the A.t.c, I decided it would look good if it was shiny, and the glossy accents which I'm applying here will help it to stand out more and give the heart an embossed effect. Glossy accents is a clear dimensional medium. The amount of time it takes to dry will depend on how thick a layer you apply. I let it air dry for a little bit while I unpicked the stitching on my A.t.c, but after that my impatience got the better of me and I decided to use my heat gun to dry it quicker. I applied some Cosmic Shimmer acrylic glue to the back of the heart before I stitched it onto the A.t.c. I check how the A.t.c will look inside the gatefold background. I then use a makeup sponge to apply some black archival ink around the edges of my A.t.c. I then use some double-sided tape and some more Cosmic Shimmer to adhere the A.t.c to the background. I'm using the Holtz Idea-ology Small Talk stickers to add some words to my A.t.c. I'm using the makeup sponge with the black Archival ink still on it to go around each of the words. I added a little cosmic shimmer glue behind each of the word stickers to make sure they were fully adhered to the A.t.c. I also added some thin sewing thread to the top right hand corner for some visual interest and texture. I have this flower stamp which I got from Hobbycraft, and again I'm using Archival ink to stamp the image onto some white card, and then I cut the image out. For this flower I decided to emboss it. I used a clear embossing ink pad and clear embossing powder, which I then heat up to melt. I cut these 3 leaf shapes from a colouring book. I'm also going to emboss them in the exact same way that I did the flower. I'm now arranging all the pieces to where I want them on my A.t.c. Once again I'm adding some sewing thread to my A.t.c. I place it behind the flower and then glue it down with some cosmic shimmer glue. I used this die set from Xcut dies to cut some little button shapes from some scraps of the background paper that I had left over. After I selected which button shape I wanted, I also decided to heat emboss it before adhering it to my flower. I then decided to create a little bow in the centre of the flower using embroidery thread. I then used double-sided tape and cosmic shimmer glue to adhere the flower to the A.t.c. Next I tore the A.t.c in half, and once again I used envelope paper as a backing to adhere the A.t.c to. Once again I used my pokey tool to make holes in the A.t.c. I then used the embroidery thread to stitch across the centre. I really enjoy adding stitching to my projects. I like the texture it creates. Sometimes I hand stitch and other times I will use my sewing machine. It really just depends what I feel like on the day and what mood I'm in as to whether I hand stitch or use a sewing machine. Now I'm inking the edges before adhering it to the gatefold cover. Once everything's stuck down, I will snip off the edges because when you create a split in the middle of the A.t.c, it makes it longer than it was before. I chose some more of the Holtz Idea-ology stickers to add some words to this A.t.c and finish it off nicely. For the third A.t.c, I'm using this colouring book and I cut out this butterfly shape, and I'm now inking the edges using Archival black ink. I then decided to heat emboss the butterfly as I have before with all the main focal points for each A.t.c. Once I selected which background I wanted for this A.t.c, I then tore it diagonally. I then once again took some envelope paper and used it to fill the void in between the 2 segments of the A.t.c. I then watered down some white gesso and used my fan brush to create some splatters onto the A.t.c. Once again, I'm creating holes with my pokey tool and I'm going to stitch along the split. I heat embossed the butterfly shape before moving on and sewing the A.t.c. I then adhered the butterfly shape to the front of the A.t.c. I wanted the butterfly to have some antennas, so I poked a hole and threaded the string through to the front. I then inked all the edges of the A.t.c and I then adhered it to the gatefold cover. I'm now adding some thin sewing string to the bottom corner as I have a lot of space down there, and once I've done that I'm going to add some more Tim Holtz word stickers to finish this A.t.c off. If you have any questions regarding this project or anything else that I make, then please feel free to pop a comment down below this video. I really love these Tim Holtz stickers, they're really easy to use and I really like the words and phrases. I have before used my computer and typed up some words and printed them out and stuck them to my A.t.cs, which works just as well. We made it to number 4. I've ripped the background and I've got the envelope paper, and just as before I'm sticking the background paper to the envelope to create a full A.t.c with a split in the middle. Next I used some watered down gesso and my fan brush to create some splatters across the background. I also heat embossed the flower, which I cut from a colouring book page. I then went around the edge of the A.t.c using black Archival ink, and I then used another one of the buttons that I die cut earlier to stick to the centre of the flower. After using my pokey tool to create some holes, I then stitched up the centre of the split using embroidery thread once again. I also decided to stitch a little cross in the centre of the flower. I cut out some more leaf shapes from the colouring book, which I also heat embossed, and now I'm placing them on my A.t.c and also some string in the top right hand corner. Once arranging the flowers and leaves in a way that I found appealing, I then took a Stabilo Marks all pencil and went around the stem of the flower. I then took a water brush and activated the pencil. I'm now using Cosmic Shimmer glue to adhere the string to the right hand corner and also the leaf shapes and the flower too. I then decided I didn't like the bottom half of the A.t.c. I thought it needed some more pattern, some more colour, some more interest. So I took some of the spare background paper and I tore up some little pieces and I stuck them down onto the A.t.c. To finish off the 4th A.t.c, I took some more of the Tim Holtz Idea-ology stickers and I went around the edges with some ink before cutting them up and arranging them in a way that I was happy with. I really enjoy making A.t.cs and also index cards. I used to like making twinches as well, which are 2" by 2" little mini pieces of artwork. So finally I've finished this A.t.c and we're now moving on to number 5. I used some envelope paper to cut a large heart from, and I also used some of the spare background paper to cut a smaller heart from, and I did cut out some flower shapes, although I don't end up using them. As before, I tore the A.t.c in half and I've stuck it down onto some envelope backing paper. I then stitched along the centre once again, so this last A.t.c will match all the others. I then decided the 5th A.t.c should be extra special, so I took the little heart and tore it in half before poking some little holes into it, and later on I will stitch it back together. Firstly, I took the bigger of the 2 hearts and I inked around the edges of it. Then I decided to heat emboss all the focal images that will be used on this A.t.c. Next I decided to add some more scraps of background paper to this A.t.c, as I thought the bottom of it looked a little bit like a snowman's body and I did not want that. I also wanted to add some more colour and pattern around the A.t.c to make it more visually interesting. Next I used the Stabilo Marks pencil to go around the middle of the A.t.c, also to create some circles, and then activating the pencil with my water brush. Now I'm positioning the focal elements of my A.t.c where I want them to go. But before sticking down the focal elements of my A.t.c, I decide I need to tweak the background a little bit more and add some red background paper to the bottom half of the A.t.c. Once I'm finally happy with the background, I then adhere the envelope heart shape to the A.t.c. I then add a thin piece of string and I use some sewn thread to stitch the broken heart back together. I then adhere it to the A.t.c using Cosmic Shimmer acrylic glue. Lastly, I add this little butterfly which I punched out of some spare paper which I had left over from when I created the Faux Crackle effect background. As with all the other A.t.cs, I used the Tim Holtz Idea-ology stickers to add a little quote to my A.t.c. These are all the A.t.cs I've created so far. I'm now going to finish the gatefold element. First of all, I'm going to punch out some borders. Once I've punched all the borders, I then use some black acrylic paint to paint over them. When this paint is dry, I then take some white gesso and go around all of the edges. Then I'm going to use my pokey tool and create a little hole in the centre of each border. I then attach a tiny little button shaped brad to each one. Now I'm adhering the borders to the front of each gatefold A.t.c. Once stuck down, I trim off any excess and repeat this process on the other side. Once I've stuck all the borders to the fronts of all the gatefold A.t.cs, I then decide to decorate the inside of the gatefold doors a little further. I use a stencil and I use some black acrylic paint to go over each gatefold door. You might wonder why I'm using black acrylic paint to go over black acrylic paint. However, the base paint has a slightly more matte finish and the one I'm using now has a more gloss finish. So although the stencil won't be seen very clearly, in certain lights you'll be able to pick it up. I then decided to cut out some strips from the backing paper which I made at the beginning of the video and use them to further embellish the gatefold cards. I repeated this process on each of the cards and I used Pritt stick glue to stick them down. I really love how these gatefold A.t.cs have turned out. I've just got to add a few little more flourishes and then I'm done. Here I'm just adding what swap it was for and the date and my name. I really hope my swap partner will love these gatefold A.t.cs as much as I do. I'm really happy with the way they've turned out. To close the A.t.cs, I'm going to paint some embroidery thread and then I'm gonna wait for it to dry before tying it around each of the gatefold A.t.cs. Thank you everyone for watching and sticking with me to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, comment and subscribe.